If we're to consider the development of Christianity in the second half of the 20th century, another significant aspect to think about is the global spread of Christianity. The late 20th century, the first part of the 21st century, Christianity, its story is really a global story. And there's many good places where we could talk about the spread and flowering of Christianity. South America, Africa, but one place to really zero in on is the spread of Christianity in China. This is useful also because we've looked at China in several different moments now throughout our studies. We've looked at Christianity in China in the early medieval period. We've looked at in the context of the 16th century. We've looked at in the context of the 19th century. Now here again we are in the 20th century. And so in the 20th century, we need to think about Christianity in China in the context of the Cold War. Right after World War II, in the period between 1946 and 1949, both the Protestant and Roman Catholic churches show real growth in its populations there. We can estimate there's about 3.2 million Roman Catholics in the country, about 200,000 catechumens, that is, people preparing to be baptized, 2,700 Chinese priests, 2,100 foreign priests in China for the Roman Catholic Church. On the Protestant side, there are about 1 million Protestants, about 600,000 inquirers, 2,000 Chinese clergy, 925 foreign clergy. What's significant is that in 1949, the communist forces win the civil war that had unfolded in China after the end of the Japanese occupation of China in World War II. So communists come to power under Chairman Mao Zedong, and part of Chairman Mao's goal is to purge China of any religions they view as counter-revolutionary. Especially anything that's associated with the West or with capitalist countries. Certainly a lot of Protestantism is going to fall under suspicion in that context. As the Korean War emerges in 1951, and the Chinese Communist Party and the Soviet Union take the side of the communists in Korea, and the Americans take the side of democratic federal forces in Korea, that becomes a flashpoint for the expulsion of all Western missionaries from China in 1951. So what happens to Christianity in China when it's essentially on its own? And Western assistance is largely absent under a communist regime. So in a Protestant context, we have leftist Protestants, that is, Protestants who are given to seeing socialism as perhaps presenting some solutions to cultural problems, social problems, welcoming the communist victory, and they decide to work with the new communist government. This leads to the development of the Three Self movement in China, where the vision of the church is for it to be self-propagating, self-financing, and self-governing. Now, if you've been paying attention, that Three Self movement is the vision that Henry Venn of the Church and Missionary Society had articulated as the goal of all missionary movement, that it become indigenous to whatever culture it's planted within. And so part of what the communist regime is saying is Chinese Christianity cannot be dependent on the outside world. And so the Three Self identity is really taken a hold of by Protestants as their way forward. This leads to something known as the Three Self Church that crystallizes these ideals that aims to be sort of a political mass movement of Christians rather than specifically a new denominational structure. And part of what it wants to do is root out any kind of imperialist, westernized thinking so that Chinese Christianity, in a way, gets indigenized into this new context, kind of a post-colonial, post-imperial context. On the Roman Catholic side, the communist government insists on the development of what's called the three autonomies, which looks very similar to the three self-movement on the Protestant side. So autonomous administration, autonomous finances, autonomous propagation of faith. Really what they want to do is sever any Roman Catholic dependence on the papacy. The papacy as seen as a threat for the communist regime, because a Roman Catholic Church in China would not see the Chinese Communist Party as the central point of authority, but rather the papacy as the central point of authority. And so they want to do away with that by creating the three autonomies. The problem from the Chinese Catholic perspective is that an independent Catholic Church in China really couldn't be in union with Rome. It really had to become its own sort of thing. And that is not a good solution from the Chinese Catholic perspective. In 1954, Pope Pius XII tries to address this issue by formulating a papal encyclical Ad Canarum Gentes, which means to the Chinese nation, or to the Chinese people in Latin, where he rejects the three autonomies principle, as opposed to this real concern that the Chinese state has about regulating and controlling religion. Remember, the papacy has already clashed with an earlier instantiation of the Chinese state back when we're dealing with the Chinese rights controversy in the late 16th through early 18th century. And remember that at that point, the Chinese emperor got very mad at the papacy for, again, rejecting Chinese imperial intervention into Chinese Catholic affairs, and ends up expelling Chinese Catholic missionaries as a result. So we're essentially we're seeing history going over earlier patterns we have already discerned. So what happens is in June 1957, there is the establishment of the Chinese Catholic Patriotic Association by the Communist Party. This establishes state oversight of Chinese Catholics and says that national churches can order their own lives, and wants to argue that bishops can elect new bishops in China and then submit their names to Rome for approval, which is not how the Roman Catholic Church does things when it comes to appointing bishops. The Bishop of Rome, the Pope, appoints all bishops. So Pius XII rejects this offer as well as an attempt to put the Roman Catholic Church under the control of the state. And that is a no-go, and we've seen that issue play out back with the investiture controversy of the 11th and 12th centuries. So again, studying earlier patterns of history help us understand contemporary issues of debates. Nonetheless, the Chinese Catholic Patriotic Association elects 2 bishops, and by 1962, there are about 40 more bishops that are chosen. In June 1958, Pius XII decrees that any bishop that's ordained independent of papal approval has no authority. And so essentially what you have is the emergence of 2 different Roman Catholic movements in China. There is the officially approved one, the Chinese Catholic Patriotic Association, and then there's essentially an underground Roman Catholic movement that only adheres to papal authority. So this 2-tier movement in Catholicism is a real issue. In 1966, there's a really severe period of persecution of Christians that lasts throughout the period known as the Cultural Revolution, ending in 1976. So a decade-long period of rather intense persecution of Chinese Christians, whether Protestant or Roman Catholic. By the late 1970s into the 1980s, there's a loosening of religious restrictions. And now Chinese Christians begin to seek ways to accommodate again to a new reality as China itself opens up to the rest of the world economically and culturally. This leads to a rapid growth, especially in Protestant circles, of about 18 to 20 million attending official three self-churches, but then an additional 65 to 100 million attending so-called underground churches, which is churches that aren't officially approved by the Chinese government. Roman Catholics during this period also grow, but more slowly. Our best estimates are about 6 million exist in the official church of the Chinese Catholic Patriotic Association. But many of these bishops are consecrated yet until they're approved by Rome. And there's another 6 to 8 million that meet in these underground house churches that have bishops and priests that claim loyalty to the Vatican. Right now, the Vatican is trying to reach an agreement with the Chinese Catholic Patriotic Association about how to mutually recognize one another's bishops, with a future goal of approval of any bishops by both parties. And the Roman Catholic Church continues to make strides in this area, but there's a lot to work out, again, with how the Chinese Communist Party understands its own authority in religious matters. So this gives us a good snapshot of one area where Christianity is both growing rapidly, but its context looks very different than, say, an American or Western context. And it's important to pay attention then to questions of how Christianity will develop in these new regions. Okay, that's all for this time. Our final video is going to be looking at the Second Vatican Council and its influence on Christianity globally.